Young Cadet mocked her silence until the general explained why she couldn't speak. "Oh, this is rich." Cadet First Class Derek Holt's voice cut through the administration wing of Fort Meade's Joint Intelligence Training Center like a blade scraping across bare metal. He was 22 years old, 6 feet of regulation posture, and every word he said came with an audience he'd assembled by instinct. "They sent us a quiet one. I've seen more personality in a classified file. You gonna speak, sweetheart? Or is silence suffering your whole thing?" 43 people stood in the tiled hallway, cadets in pressed blues, 2 senior instructors with clipboards, a maintenance tech who'd stopped mid-task with a wrench still in his hand. Every one of them heard it. Every one of them looked. She didn't. The woman at Workstation 7 was 31 years old, compact and still in the specific way that certain animals are still, not resting, not absent. Present in every molecule. Her dark hair was pulled into a regulation bun without a single strand loose. Her uniform was standard contractor blue, with no rank insignia, no unit patch, no name tag beyond the single word consultant on a laminated badge clipped to her left breast pocket. Her face was angular, unremarkable, designed by nature for the kind of forgetting that saves lives. Her hands moved across the keyboard with a rhythm that was not fast so much as exact, each keystroke placed with the same deliberate spacing, the same measured force. She did not look up. "I'm talking to you." Holt stepped closer. His shadow fell across her workspace, crossing the monitor, crossing her hands. He wore the chest ribbons of a man who'd graduated every training cycle at the top, who'd never had a superior tell him no in a way he hadn't immediately argued out of. "Administration said you're here to, what was it? Consult on the network migration." "Consult? I didn't know they sent consultants who don't consult. You got a voice in there somewhere, or did they forget to install that feature?" His team laughed, the kind of laugh that invites everyone else to join in. Her hands stopped moving. Not flinching, not pausing, simply finishing the sentence she'd been typing and setting both palms flat on the desk surface. She turned and looked at him for the first time, and there was nothing in her eyes that could be called reaction. There was only patience. Patient the way a river is patient, not because it doesn't know where it's going, but because it has all the time it needs to get there. "Currently restricted from verbal communication, sir," she said. Her voice was low even, the kind of voice that had been used to give orders in places where volume was a tactical liability. "Health protocol. You'll want to check with the medical officer." Then she turned back to her keyboard. Holt's jaw tightened. That was not the answer. There was a right answer when he performed this particular routine: embarrassment or defiance. Either one giving him something to work with, and that quiet, precise deflection was neither. He looked back at his team. A few of them grinned. One didn't. In the far corner of the hallway, partially obscured by the edge of a metal shelving unit, stood a man no one had formally introduced. He was 61 years old, built like someone who'd spent 4 decades maintaining the kind of fitness that has nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with survival. His face was a map of long service, the lines deep, the expression unreadable in the way of a man who'd spent his career reading others. Master Sergeant Lenny Callahan, 34 years in, currently assigned as Senior Evaluation Lead for the Training Center's Advanced Assessment Cycle. He'd been in this hallway for 11 minutes before Holt arrived. He hadn't moved when the cadet started talking. He hadn't moved during the woman's response. But his pen had stopped moving. He was watching her hands. Specifically, he was watching the angle of her right wrist as she returned to the keyboard, the slight outward rotation, the spacing of her fingers on the keys. He'd seen that grip before. Once, in a debrief room at a school most people in this building had never heard of, on a woman who'd been introduced to him with a code name and a handshake, and no further explanation. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Something about this woman. He couldn't place it. But it was there. The afternoon brought new indignities. By 1400, the story had traveled through 3 group chats and at least one instructor's mess hall table. The version circulating was not that a contractor had been briefly confronted by a cadet with too much energy. The version circulating was that the mute woman in administration hadn't been able to answer a basic security clearance question and had been flagged for review. Neither of those things had happened. It didn't matter. She sat in the commissary eating a lunch she hadn't tasted. Something institutional and beige, protein efficient, with both ears open and her eyes on her tray. She was filing patterns. Who sat with whom? Who deferred when the instructors walked by? Which instructors actually read the files they carried, and which ones carried them for the theater of authority? She'd been building this picture for 6 days. The lunch was not a meal. It was 32 minutes of uninterrupted intelligence work. At 14:17, Holt walked past her table with 3 of his people. "Still no words?" he said, projecting for the nearest occupied tables. "Maybe she's actually undercover. Secret mission. Stay completely useless for maximum effect." She controlled her breathing. 4 in. Hold 4. 4 out. Hold 4. At 14:45, she was back at her workstation. The monthly authentication cycle for the secure partition rolled over at 1500, a rotating 23-character credential that the system generated fresh every 30 days. Most operators had the sequence in a printed reference card. Some had it memorized, and the good ones could enter it in under 90 seconds. She began the input at 14:58:43. She was done at 14:59:01. 18 seconds. The kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from a manual. Master Sergeant Callahan, who had appeared at the far end of the workstation row ostensibly to review a training log, watched this. His pen stopped moving a second time. He wrote nothing for 11 seconds. Then he began writing something that had nothing to do with the training log. By 1500, the public story about her had evolved its second generation. The first version, silent contractor, possible clearance problem, had mutated through the mess hall into a sharper, more entertaining narrative. The version people were trading now involved falsified credentials. A political appointment gone wrong, someone's girlfriend placed somewhere convenient. None of it was sourced. All of it was confident. Holt had not started this version. He hadn't needed to. He'd given it a direction, and it had found its own momentum, the way rumors always do in institutions that run on hierarchy and fill the gaps between certainty with speculation. She ate lunch alone again, not because no one would sit with her, because sitting alone gave her a sightline to 3 tables, 2 doors, and the traffic pattern of anyone moving between the secure annex and the administrative wing. She was doing intelligence work. The food was fuel. The silence was a tool. At 15:30, Holt's team ran a weapons familiarization drill in the range facility adjacent to the main building. Standard training, disassembly, function check, reassembly of an M1110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. The range instructor timed each cadet. Average time for the sequence was 4 minutes, 12 seconds. She was in the observation corridor on a separate task, a cable run she'd been assigned by the facility's tech supervisor when the drill concluded. Through the glass partition, she watched. Not obviously, peripherally, but watching. Later, in the corridor outside the range, one of Holt's team members dropped a component from a disassembled sidearm. A recoil spring assembly, bouncing on the tile and rolling toward her feet. She picked it up without looking down. without adjusting her grip on the cable bundle she was carrying, and handed it back. The angle of her wrist when she returned it, the way her fingers had indexed to the component before she'd visually confirmed what it was. The kind of instinctive hands-on recognition that occurs only after thousands of repetitions in conditions where looking down wasn't an option. Holt's team members stared at the spring in his hand and then at her retreating back. He didn't say anything. He stood there for 4 seconds with his mouth slightly open, and then he turned and went back into the range facility and said nothing to anyone. Callahan, who had been in the range corridor on a training evaluation walk, had seen it. His face gave away nothing, but he wrote something in his margin. She controls her breathing. 4 in, hold 4. 4 out, hold 4. At 1600, she was back in the corridor near the secondary server room, running a cable continuity check with a handheld diagnostic tool. The way she held it, right thumb at the base connector, left forefinger indexed along the sensor strip, tool angled 11 degrees off vertical for better acoustic feedback, was not the way the manual described. It was not the way any manual described. It was the way someone held it after spending enough time in fieldwork that factory position instructions became a suggestion worth discarding. Holt passed again. He had a talent for appearing in the spaces she occupied. Still mute. Still useless. He said it to his colleague, pitched loud enough to guarantee reception. I've filed a query with admin about her clearance level. If she's actually classified, they should be able to confirm it. And if they can't, he smiled with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a confrontation he engineered himself, we'll know what kind of consultant she really is. His colleague gave an obliging half-smile. Holt moved on. From a position 14 feet away, behind a partial wall, Callahan watched the woman carefully set down her diagnostic tool. He watched her sleeve ride up slightly at the wrist, just enough to show the edge of a tattoo. He couldn't see it clearly. The image was wrong-angled, brief, gone when she pulled the sleeve back. But he'd seen the edge of it. The geometric angles, the particular placement on the inner wrist, not decorative, not personal. Classified insignia. The kind of appearance that says this is official business at the highest level. He said nothing. He walked back to his office, sat down, and stared at the middle distance for approximately 90 seconds. He thought about the wrist grip on the keyboard. The authentication code in 18 seconds. The recoil spring component caught without looking. The edge of the tattoo. He thought about a debrief room in a building he'd been in exactly once, 7 years ago, where a woman with a code name and no rank had shaken his hand and told him the names of 4 people who were going to be found in a particular location within 72 hours and recovered alive, and had then turned and walked out without waiting for a response. He'd been told she died in a subsequent operation. He'd believed it because there was no reason not to. He picked up a secure line and made a single call to a number that was not on any roster in this building. The call lasted 45 seconds. He said 3 words. The other person said 2. The call ended. Callahan placed the handset back and returned to the window. His face gave away nothing. But his right hand, resting on the desk, had fingers that were very slightly separated, the involuntary posture of a man who's just received confirmation of something he'd hoped was wrong. At 1640, the security officer for the training center received a brief communication from the medical officer's office confirming that the contractor had an active voice restriction protocol on file, medically authorized, with a documented exception clause on file in administrative records. The communication was routine. It did not require action. The security officer filed it. Holt's clearance query came back at 1700 with an administrative hold, not a denial, not a confirmation. A hold. This was unusual. This was, in fact, the kind of response that should have made a careful person reconsider. Holt was not a careful person. He was a thorough one. There was a difference, and it was a difference that was going to matter considerably in the next 2 hours. She controls her breathing. 4 in. Hold 4. 4 out. Hold 4. At 17:10, the facility held its late afternoon briefing. 22 people in the briefing room. She was not present. She had no reason to be. Officially, she was 3 rooms away running a network diagnostic on a server cluster that had intermittent packet loss. But someone in that briefing had asked about the contractor with the clearance hold. And someone had answered in a way that prompted 3 people to look at the floor, and 1 person. A junior signals officer who'd noticed the authentication speed 3 hours ago, to look at the wall instead. The junior signals officer said nothing, but his hands were flat on the table in front of him, very still. At 17:30, Holt filed a formal security challenge under the training center's verification protocol, citing inability to confirm the contractor's credentials through standard channels. This action triggered 2 automatic responses. The first was a notification to the center's security officer. The second, which Holt did not know about, could not have known about, was a flag on a monitoring system 4 organizational layers above his clearance level that activated the moment anyone attempted formal credential verification on the identity she was carrying. A system she had known about. A system she had planned for. A system that had been, from the beginning, the door she was waiting for someone to open. She was back at her workstation when the security officer's aide came to find her. Her expression did not change. She closed the active window, logging out in 3 keystrokes, and followed the aide without a word. The door to the security review room was gray. The walls of the review room were gray. The bench was metal. Not nearly comfortable. Never meant to be. I need you to provide verbal confirmation of your name, contractor ID, and organizational affiliation, the security officer said. He was young for his rank, earnest, doing his job. He had not started this. He was simply the mechanism Holt had chosen. Currently restricted from verbal communication, she said. Medical protocol. Documentation on file with the medical officer. Copied to your security administration. I'm aware. However, a formal challenge requires a verbal response by protocol. Then, I'd suggest reviewing the protocol exception clause, subsection 4D, which allows written response in the case of documented medical restriction. She held his gaze. Her voice was even, steady, the voice of a woman who had been in rooms considerably more dangerous than this and had not adjusted her breathing for any of them. I'd also suggest doing it quickly. We're approximately 40 minutes from a situation that is going to be significantly above your authority level to manage. The security officer stared at her. Then, he picked up his phone. She did not watch him dial. She looked at the ceiling. 4 in. Hold 4. 4. Out. Hold 4. 37 minutes later, her watch read 1842. The review room was 12 feet by 9 feet. The concrete walls had a chemical smell. Industrial cleaner inadequately covering something older. Something that had seeped into the material over years. There was a window near the ceiling, steel mesh over reinforced glass, showing a strip of sky going from pale blue to the first pink edges of evening. She had been sitting for 37 minutes. She had not spoken since the security officer left. She was the calmest person in the building, which at this moment was not a difficult achievement. This was the near-fail moment. The part where anyone watching from the outside would think she's finished. Contained, Game over. Except she had understood when she walked into this building 6 days ago that this room, or one like it, was part of the architecture. You don't spend 3 months building a legend and embedding operational triggers in someone's systems if you plan to walk out the front door unchallenged. She had built this situation. She had given it a shape, and she had made sure, in that shape, there were doors that only opened from the inside. Her watch read 1843. In 9 minutes, a protocol she'd activated at 0600 would trigger an automated contact attempt to a number she hadn't answered in 6 days. 3 missed contacts from a handler generated an automatic escalation. That escalation went up 4 organizational layers, to a level that did not communicate with facilities like Fort Meade's training center through normal channels. It communicated through a different kind of channel entirely. In 41 minutes, the formal hold she'd placed on her own cover identity through a secondary system would expire, releasing a packet of documentation to 3 different oversight offices simultaneously. The kind of documentation that included clearance levels above everyone in this building, mission designations that were not in any accessible database, and a set of operational authorizations with a specific scope that encompassed every action taken against her in the last 6 days. In approximately 2 hours, Cadet First Class Derek Holt was going to learn the difference between institutional authority and actual power, between the map and the territory, between the hierarchy printed on organizational charts and the one that existed in classified files no one in this building had clearance to open. She settled her hands in her lap. The tattoo on her inner wrist was covered by her sleeve. It had been covered since day 1. It would not be covered much longer. Her watch read 1844. She waited. The door to the review room opened at 1851. It was not the security officer. Master Sergeant Lenny Callahan entered with the specific economy of a man who has decided something and is done with the deciding. He was alone. He closed the door behind him. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has been carrying a question for 9 hours and has just received the answer he hoped was wrong. "I'm going to say a word," he said quietly, "and I'm going to ask you to tell me if I'm in the right building." She watched him. He said a single word. A call sign. Not a name. Not a rank. The kind of designation that is not in any file accessible below a certain clearance level. That is spoken only in rooms where everything is off the record. And that belongs to exactly one person. The person who earned it in an operation that officially did not occur. In a country that officially did not host it. In a situation that was resolved by methods that officially were not used. She looked at him for 3 long seconds. "You're in the right building, Master Sergeant." His face did something complicated. Not surprise. He'd been past surprise for at least 3 hours. Something more like grief, briefly, and then a settling. A resolution. "I thought you were dead," he said. The whole unit thought, "I know." "How long have you been back?" "Long enough." He looked at her for a moment longer. Not aggressively. Just there. Then he stood straighter than he had when he walked in, and something in his posture shifted. A subtle but total reorganization of weight and bearing that anyone who'd spent time in uniform would recognize as a man returning to a relationship with authority he had previously suspended. "Is it going to get loud and about?" He glanced at his watch. 11 minutes, she said. "I'd like to be in the hallway. I'd recommend it." He nodded once. He turned to leave, and then stopped with his hand on the doorframe. He did not turn around. "They didn't know," he said. "Most of them. I know that too." He left. The door closed behind him with the soft, complete click of a man who'd made his decision and wasn't revisiting it. She looked at her watch. 1852. She controlled her breathing. 4. In. Hold 4. 4 out. Hold 4. At 19:03, 3 vehicles arrived at the main gate of Fort Meade's training annex. Not standard transport. Command birds. The kind with sealed rear compartments and no exterior markings except the specific placard configuration that gate personnel are trained to recognize and immediately clear. The duty officer at the gate made a call before he finished checking credentials. He was on the phone with the facility commander for 45 seconds. The facility commander was off the phone and in motion for the remaining 4 minutes of transit time. By 19:07, 4 people were walking across the facility's main courtyard toward the administration building. 4 people in full-service dress, not utilities. The kind of dress worn to an official function, or a court-martial, or an event that will be documented. The kind of appearance that says this is official business at the highest level. Cadet Holt was in the briefing annex with 2 of his teammates when someone opened the door and said, with a particular quality of voice, that he should come to the main hall. His blood ran cold before he'd crossed the threshold, though he wouldn't have admitted it. He walked into the main hall and saw the 4 figures being met by the facility commander, and his mind went through the possibilities quickly and in the wrong order. A training inspection, a congressional visit, some administrative matter entirely unrelated to the last 6 hours. His mind arranged the evidence incorrectly because the correct arrangement was not available to him. He didn't have the clearance for correct. He went quiet. Not theatrical, just quiet. The facility commander's face was doing something Holt had never seen it do. It was the face of a man performing the calculation of how much he did not know, and arriving at a number that frightened him. The lead figure from the vehicles spoke to the commander in a tone that did not carry to where Holt was standing. The commander listened. He nodded once. He turned to a junior officer and said 3 words. The junior officer went toward the security review room at a pace that was not running, but was adjacent to it. 30 seconds later, the door to the security review room opened. She walked out. She walked out in the same contractor uniform she'd been wearing for 6 days, with the same regulation bun, with the same badge clipped to her pocket. She looked the same. That was the first thing Holt noticed. She looked completely the same, and nothing about her had changed, and yet every person in uniform in this hallway, every one of them, had undergone some fundamental reorientation in relationship to her that he could not account for. She walked to the lead figure. They exchanged something quiet, something brief, and then the lead figure turned to face the hallway. "I need everyone's attention." His voice did not require volume. The hallway had already gone silent in the way that specific rooms sometimes go silent. Not because anything stopped, but because the air itself changed character. The individual who has been assigned to this facility as a technical consultant will be departing within the hour. Before she does, there's something this command needs to understand for the record. He produced a folder from under his arm. He opened it. He did not read from it. He simply placed it, face up, on the desk nearest him, where the closest personnel could see the classification stamp across the header. Classified red. Above everyone present. The security officer moved first. He stepped toward the desk, looked at what was on the page, and went rigid, hand frozen mid-reach, eyes making a second pass, face cycling through surprise. Then something that might have been denial. Then the particular expressionless quality of a man absorbing information that requires significant restructuring of what he thought he understood. He looked up at her. She was already looking at him, patient, a river. All the time it needed. Her designation, the lead figure said. And then he said it. Her rank, her classification clearance. 2 full levels above everyone in the room. Her call sign, which caused the facility commander to close his eyes briefly, as if suddenly understanding the shape of something he'd seen and dismissed. And 1 mission designation. A single operation code that had been classified for 7 years, that had been flagged as an ongoing investigation into the deaths of 6 intelligence operatives betrayed to hostile intelligence by a source inside the Joint Command structure, whose identity had not been confirmed, whose identity was 2 names down on a list that she had been building for 6 days in this building. The room detonated, not loudly. Gasps, actual audible gasps, from multiple personnel simultaneously. Someone dropped a tablet. The clatter hit the tile and echoed like a single shot in the sudden silence, and then the hum seemed deafening. And then a boot scuffed tile somewhere, and then there was a chair scraping concrete as someone stood up who hadn't planned to. Holt was standing very still. His face was moving through a sequence of expressions, surprise leading to shock, leading to a species of genuine fear, and then it stopped moving altogether. He was rigid in the way of a man who has understood, too late, the difference between what he was doing and what she was doing. He'd thought he was exposing her. He'd been her mechanism of self-revelation. His challenge, his clearance query, his formal security filing, every single official action he'd taken had been the protocol she'd needed someone to trigger. He'd done exactly what she'd required. He'd destroyed himself. She was already thinking about what came next. The lead figure raised his hand in the slow, deliberate motion of a senior salute, hand traveling to the brow, wrist angled in the crisp formal geometry of military respect, held for 3 full seconds. Beside him, the 3 others followed. Then, the facility commander. Then, in a cascade that moved through the hallway like a wave through water, every officer and ENCO present, 41 people, raised their hands. Callahan raised his last, in the corner where he'd positioned himself 11 minutes ago. His salute was the quietest. It was the one she held longest. Holt did not salute. He stood at a species of attention, not defiance, not the stage theater he'd been performing for 6 days. Something much smaller, something that looked, in its own specific way, like a beginning of understanding. The security officer put a call in, quietly, from a position near the door. He spoke for 30 seconds. He ended the call. He crossed the room to a position next to Holt and spoke in a register that did not reach anyone else. Holt's face did not change. He nodded once, with his eyes on the middle distance. Whatever he'd been building toward in this facility, the record, the reputation, the trajectory of advancement he'd been performing for his entire adult life, had just been handed a complication that would be considerably above his pay grade to navigate. Institutional consequences. Official channels. The architecture of accountability doing its careful, grinding work. She was already outside. The courtyard at Fort Meade's training annex faced west. At 1931, the sky above it had gone from pink to a deep, layered orange at the horizon, with violet accumulating in the upper registers, the kind of colors that don't repeat, that exist in that specific window of 15 minutes and then are gone. She stood at the edge of the courtyard with her hands loose at her sides, watching it. Her watch read 1931:47. They mocked her silence. They forgot her silence was classified. They'd looked at a woman with no insignia and no voice and seen something to diminish. They'd seen a gap in the record where a person was supposed to be, and they'd rushed to fill that gap with their assumptions. The thing they'd forgotten, the thing Derek Holt would be a very long time understanding, was that the gaps in records do not indicate absence. They indicate classification. The things worth knowing are the things you're not allowed to see. Justice isn't loud. It's patient. She looked at her watch again. 1932-03. There were still 2 names on her list. The operational scope of what she'd uncovered in 6 days inside this facility had confirmed the 4th name, which put the total at 4 confirmed out of 6. The betrayal that had killed her unit 7 years ago. 6 operators, a mission that officially did not occur. Deaths that had been filed as training accidents had been engineered from inside the Joint Command structure by people still in uniform. 4 of them were now in the process of being quietly, officially, permanently removed from that structure. 2 remained. She'd found in Holt's security filing a cross-referenced name that corresponded to a communication node she'd flagged in the 3rd day of her access audit. The node had been active from 3 locations over 18 months. 2 she could account for. The 3rd was a rooftop access point in a district of a city she had not yet been authorized to visit, captured on a surveillance image from 31 months ago that had been misclassified and buried under 3 layers of administrative filing. Someone had been in that city. Someone who was not on any personnel roster she'd been given. Someone who was still out there. She turned from the sunset and walked toward the waiting vehicle. Regulation bun, no rank insignia. Badge clipped to her left breast pocket. The badge that said consultant in clean, readable letters. The badge that was, in its way, the most honest thing about her. She was consulting, after all. The dead consulted her constantly. Tomorrow brought new ghosts to hunt. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.